Alright guys, so we're going to be talking a little bit about how to read your textbook more effectively because this seems to be a topic that a lot of students are struggling with. So we're going to start with Chapter 12. Chapter 12 is going to cover a lot of different topics, but again, one thing I can recommend when you're reading your book is to do some pre-reading. A lot of students will skip that step when they're in a hurry because they think it's going to save them time, but honestly, you're going to have to backtrack more if you don't know what you're reading about and what the key things you need to pull away are. So I would recommend always start here. Even if you think you don't have enough time, start here. This is honestly more important sometimes than reading the whole thing front to back. So the cool thing about the American pageant is that it gives you the must-know events and people up here in the left-hand corner. And in this case, for Chapter 12, it says that you need to know about the American system, the Missouri Compromise, and the Monroe Doctrine. Now, these are by no means the only things that you should pull away from this chapter, but those are the really big ideas that you must understand. There are other important things, but we'll kind of take a look at that. So this just here, then, is the key concepts from Period 4, because Period 4 covers from 1800 to 1848, which you'll notice with the year span that they've given us for this chapter, that is the period that we're in. So where are these key concept things coming from? Is this just something from the book? No, actually. This is something from the College Board. This is it printed out. It's called the course description. So every AP course has this. And it tells you what the College Board expects you to know about this topic. So in this case, it tells you right here what key concepts are covered within this chapter. And that is really useful because then you know how to fill this thing in. So this is intentionally left blank here for you to add in events, people, and things that are related to the key concepts. So for example, let's look at this one, which you can see up here. Supreme Court decisions established by the primacy of the judiciary in determining the meaning of the Constitution and asserted that federal laws took precedence over state laws. So that's the standard, quote-unquote, of the key concept that you're supposed to be getting from this chapter, but it doesn't tell you what Supreme Court cases are going to do that. That is going to have to be determined through reading. And so we'll, in this chapter, be learning about that, and I would honestly, it's helpful to print this out and have this at your side when you are reading your chapters, but again, some of your teachers might cover it in other ways. For example, in my class, we have a packet that has this at the beginning for the unit, but I don't have it broken down by every chapter. But something you could do then is go back and highlight, in a certain color, what goes with Chapter 12, and then try to identify where that's covered in your packet or your assignment at home with your IDs. So if you're interested in finding, though, this particular layout and this document, this is going to be found at a link in the description box, or you could find it by simply Googling AP US History course description, concept outline. You'll find it. It'll be the first hit. It's a big PDF. It's over 100 pages long. There's a lot more than you probably need in there, but that's where you find the key concepts. All right, so let's dive into the book and see what Chapter 12 has in store for us. Something you'll often hear from teachers about how to read a textbook is to read the little headers, and that will give you information about what that section is going to include, and that will definitely be useful here because the header here is On to Canada over land and lakes. War of 1812 is bolded. So pretty safe bet, a lot of this stuff is going to be about war tactics, and again, this is Battles of the War of 1812. Well, if you actually look in the key concepts, there's really not anything about battles that is very meaningful or necessary. So we're just going to skip over this because of that. We don't really need to read that. Washington burned and New Orleans defended. Okay, well, they're talking here, just skimming. Washington, D.C. was burned, and the White House. But again, a lot of this has to do with the Battle of New Orleans and that kind of stuff. Don't really need it. So I would skip over that. So where we should start reading probably in more serious is the Treaty of Ghent. Treaties are usually going to be something you want to pay attention to because they're implying the end of a war. So I would read this section. Okay, read that section. I would pause the video here, read that, come back. Okay, so then, the Federalist grievances at the Hartford Convention. Now this one, just from that title, I mean, obviously it's going to talk about the Hartford Convention, but I don't really know what that is or what it means or what it's related to. So just from the title, you can't necessarily glean a lot from that. But if you quickly start skimming, you start seeing some stuff kind of related to the relationship between New England and Britain and what's going on with that. So it's kind of, again, related and tied into the stuff that's going on with the War of 1812. So I would pause the section, go read that. Okay, then the Second War for American Independence. That's kind of another term that historians will use for the War of 1812. Read this section. Okay, read all that, then unpause. Then nascent nationalism. So read this section again, and then we're going to start talking here about what should be pulled from this section, how to know what to focus on, that sort of thing. So read this, then unpause. So for major events like the War of 1812 or other things that you're going to be looking at within your textbook and within U.S. history or history in general, I always try to think about these four things as being the most important things to focus on. So causes. What caused the thing that you are trying to understand? What specifically is it? And within the what, who was involved, when, where, those sorts of basic questions, the basic facts about that thing. What were the effects of that event on America? And then why is it significant, or what's its relationship to other events? If you can talk about these things related to events, you're going to understand this at a deeper level, and this is the level of understanding that the College Board wants you to know. Not simply just names and dates. We want you to understand it on a deeper level because that's what historians do. They look at causes and effects and relationships between things and think about why they're important or their significance. So if we're doing that for the sections that you've just read related to the War of 1812, I've already kind of gotten some questions for you. So, causes. What caused the War of 1812? What was the War of 1812? Who was involved, etc.? Effects. What did this war do to America? What effects did it have? And then what was the war's significance? So I want you to pause this for a second and think about the answers to this question, and maybe you need to go back and review. Okay, so this is just a really short bulleted proof list of this, but as for causes, I mean, you could look at the Napoleonic Wars that's going on in 1807 between France and England, around the 1807 period anyway. You could look at America's attempts to stay neutral in this conflict, impressment, all the things going on with trade between us and England and France. And then as to what it is, this is just some, again, basic year range. Fighting stopped a little bit before that, but that's just the official end. So, and then the who, mainly the U.S. and Great Britain fighting one another. In the U.S. and Canada, so that's getting us the where and what it is. Effects. It increased manufacturing because when we weren't trading with Britain, when we were fighting with them, our manufacturing got its feet under itself and started to really produce a lot of goods that were necessary. Nationalism is increasing. We didn't really gain or lose any territory, so a lot of people considered that a win. And then why is it important? Because America remained independent. We were challenged in this situation by a power that, again, in a lot of cases had more resources and was more strong than us, but yet we were able to prevail and, again, reestablish ourselves as an independent nation that was capable of handling these kinds of crises. So, now, going to the next section. The American system. Well, hey, this is something that the beginning of the chapter actually stated as a must-know events and people. So this is probably going to be a pretty important thing to understand. So read this section, and then stop. So we should be done now with the American system section. And again, let's think about these four things that I've asked you to chew on. So what were the causes of the American system? What is the American system? What were the effects? What's its relationship or significance to other things? So pause this if you haven't thought about that yet. Okay. So, for causes, you could talk about things like they had terrible roads in the country, and that was really apparent to people during the War of 1812 because they had trouble getting places. You could talk about the War of 1812 as a reason, too, because we were not trading with other countries. So then when we started to resume trade, they all tried to dump all their stuff in the American markets at low prices, which is going to eat out essentially American companies, and they're not going to be able to compete with that. So they asked for tariffs, and once they wanted one, they started asking for more. So there's a lot of things you could talk about there. People in the West also want to have access to markets in the East. So, I mean, there's a lot of things as for the causes. So what is it? It's Henry Clay's plan to improve the country through strong banking. So the National Bank, lots of credit would be provided through that. And protective tariffs to protect, again, those people whose markets are being flooded with foreign goods, and a means to produce infrastructure and build roads, canals, etc. to make transport easier. So what are the effects of that? Well, there is easier transport. It intertwines the North and South economically because, again, a big part of the system is the South is going to produce those kind of agricultural goods that will be sent up north, and then the North will manufacture things and then send them back down south, sell them to them. So they're going to be dependent on each other economically. You could also talk about this is giving rural farmers markets in the East, so they're going to be able to keep pushing west because they can easily access the East's markets. You could talk about the infrastructure thing and the transportation revolution that's going to result from this with the steamboat, all of that. And again, why is this important? I think you could say a lot of reasons why this is important. It's helping to literally develop the country, but also it's going to make the country stick together despite widening gaps between the North and South on things like slavery and other issues. Because I often hear from my students when we get to the Civil War unit of, well, why did the North stick around so long when they clearly disagreed so strongly on the issue of slavery? Well, you could say the American system was a big reason for that, because the North and the South depended on each other economically. So, okay. Next. The Panic of 1819 and the Curse of Hard Times. It would be good to know, if you're talking what's going on economically, this is kind of the first depression in the country, but just have a basic understanding of what this is. Growing pains of the West, so this is going to continue to talk about westward expansion. Okay. And how they're starting to develop the country. Slavery and sectional balance. This is already starting to crop up, unsurprisingly. So, I want you to read Slavery and Sectional Balance, The Uneasy Missouri Compromise. Skim through here, but it's not a huge deal. And then stop here. Alright, so at the end of that section, let's ask ourselves, what were the causes of the sectional tension in the Missouri Compromise? What is it? What are the effects? What's the significance or relationship? Pause here and think about it. Okay, so what you should be pulling from there and what's kind of important. Boy, I just kind of smeared that. So, causes? Well, there's a lot of sectional divide on slavery. The North, while they do have slaves still in many states, doesn't have nearly as many and is not as reliant upon them as the South. So there's going to be a lot of disagreement there. The Talmadge Amendment is a pretty important thing to understand too. I wouldn't say it's necessarily going to be on the test though, so I will say it's important for understanding this particular issue, but maybe not as much detail as you need. But again, remember, I talked about how they weren't going to bring any more slaves into Missouri. That's not what ends up happening, but that was the initial thing that kind of spurred the whole Missouri Compromise. And just territorial expansion in general. New states are being added, and the question of slavery and what to do about it keeps arising. So what are they going to do? And so what is it? It's that 3630 parallel line where everything above it is going to be free. So again, that line is, right here. Everything above except for Missouri is going to be free now. Anything below will be slave. And Missouri gets added as a slave state. So no one's completely happy, but it's definitely, it's a compromise for now. It's going to work for now. And it holds up longer than some. But really the effects of this is it's just kind of a band-aid solution. It doesn't fix the whole issue itself. It's just a temporary solution to a problem that's going to plague the country for another 40 plus years. And if we're talking about the significance, we talked about it doesn't resolve the issue. And if you look at the map, you kind of know where states are. Look at this line. That's going to go right through California. That might be a problem at some point. Foreshadowing. This is probably not going to work out forever. So, again, significance here is it's showing that the country really has a deep divide on slavery, and we aren't really able to come up with an agreement about what all of this means and what we should do about it. There's no consensus. All right. So, judicial stuff. Okay, well, we see some court case stuff going on. And again, there's going to be some more of that. Okay, so read to about here, I'd say, and then stop. All right, so this one, I'm going to challenge you to think about these sections. Try to pull out what's most important here. Remember when I read to you the key issue thing that the College Board expects? They talked about specifically things that are changing the way the judicial branch is working, and it's defining how the Constitution's working. So that goes to the loose construction stuff. So think about which ones of these has to do with that. If you're still a little stuck with these two, it doesn't hurt to sometimes look up additional information. If the textbook isn't giving you what you feel like is enough to understand it, look it up online. You might be able to find pretty quickly what you're looking for so that you can answer this question more effectively. All right, so last thing. Monroe and his doctrine. The Monroe Doctrine, again, was something that was at the beginning of the section as a must-know. So I want you to read all of this, get to the end, and we're going to talk again about these questions. All right, so back again. We're looking at our causes. What is it? Affects significance. Should have pulled out some things that look like this. So causes, America is feeling pretty nationalistic at this point, trying to flex our muscles a little bit. And again, what else is causing it? Europe, for the most part, isn't doing a whole lot of this anymore, but Russia and some other players are still attempting to colonize parts of North America, and we're trying to tell them to back off. So what is it? Again, it's a warning to European powers that if they attempt to colonize North America anymore, we're going to see it as a threat to us. We're going to view it as a hostile act. So effects, for the most part, Europe leaves us alone. We have to work some stuff out with Russia, but for the most part, it ends up exactly as we want it to because, England, for the most part, is kind of done trying to colonize, so it's not as necessary as one might have thought. And then significance. This, I'm not saying you're going to necessarily get this completely from the chapter, but this is something that gets referred to again and again in American history as justification for a number of things. But in some cases, we use it to justify our own attempts to colonize in North America. So it's an important document that you're going to need to be familiar with again and again. And I would honestly recommend reading the contending voices so they have different opinions because practice with primary sources is key. So I hope that you found this video helpful in analyzing Chapter 12. And again, these are just bullet points. If you're taking notes, which you should be, writing something down, should be in more depth than that. I'm just trying to get bullet points so I can put it on a post-it and then show you there. But anyway, hope you found it helpful. Enjoy your reading.